Hey everyone, it's your buddy back again with another exciting fanfic, which is what if Naruto accidentally saw Hinata Nked and had to marry her. Part 1. If you enjoy this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more fanfics like this. Now, let's dive right into the fanfic. It was dark. The sun had set long ago. Naruto was stretched over sideways laying over the top of Shino and Kiba, snoring very loudly. Hinata's spot was empty. Suddenly, Kiba rolled over slinging his arm over his body and hitting Naruto square in the nose. Naruto woke up with a loud sneeze. He wiped his stinging nose and tried to go back to sleep. However, his stomach churned and his bladder clenched. Naruto jumped up and ran out of the tent. He walked a few yards away from the tent and found a good bush. The sounds of falling water soon filled the air. When Naruto was done, he sighed with relief and pulled up his pants. However, there was still a faint sound of falling water. Naruto followed the soft sound deeper into the forest until the quiet pitter-patter became a roaring downpour. Naruto pulled a large branch aside and gazed at a large, beautiful waterfall. The twinkling stars reflected off the surface of the water and the dim moon made for the perfect lighting. However, the thing that caught Naruto's attention was the abrupt movement in the center of the waterfall. There was a faint splash and then the thing moved again. Naruto blinked rapidly, trying to adjust his eyes to the dark figure. Naruto took a tentative step forward trying to get a better look at the figure. Suddenly, Naruto gasped. It was a girl, and it was the most beautiful girl Naruto had ever seen. The dim moonlight enveloped most of the girl's features in shadow, but Naruto could see the slender outline of the girl's amazing curves. The girl swung her arm up over her head and a stream of water followed after her hand. Then the light from the moon was able to reflect off the strand of water and light up parts of the beautiful girl's body. It was the most amazing thing Naruto had ever seen. Naruto wanted a closer look. He took another step forward, but his foot slipped on a wet rock and Naruto plummeted into the water. Hinata had always been a shy girl. Her father's relentless torment and emotional abuse had made her afraid to even speak. It wasn't until she met Naruto that she began to come out of her shell. However, she had never been able to hold a real conversation with him or even hint at her true feelings for him. Still, her ability to function properly in social circumstances had begun to increase after her fight with Neji in the Chunin exams. Seeing Naruto's will and determination and having him cheer for her had given the courage to change. She had begun to train more often and much more rigorously. In fact, every night she would sneak out of her tent and train until she felt like passing out. It was on one of these training escapades that Hinata found an amazing waterfall. The crystal clear water and the twinkling stars made Hinata feel at peace. It wasn't very long before Hinata was washing the day's sweat off in the refreshing water. The water felt so good and so rejuvenating that Hinata decided to dance. The fresh air and cold droplets of water on her bare skin relaxed Hinata and only seemed to encourage more dancing. Suddenly, there was a quick gasp and then a moment later there was a loud splash. Hinata screamed and lost her balance, and fell towards the direction of the sudden noises. Hinata pulled the wet hair out of her eyes and looked up into clear blue eyes. Naru. The two stayed locked in each other's eyes for a few moments. Then, Hinata looked down and realized she was still Nak. She let out another piercing scream and jumped behind a nearby rock. The scream echoed all throughout the forest until it reached Hinata's two sleeping teammates. They awoke with a start and rushed towards the sound of their endangered friend. Upon arriving, Kiba and Shino saw a very wet Naruto on his hands and knees in the stream. They rushed over towards their blonde friend and began to frantically shake him. Naruto. What was that scream? Where is Hinata? Kiba shouted. However, Naruto didn't make a sound. He had instantly recognized Hinata by her lavender eyes, but he had not noticed her lack of clothes until she had jumped away from him. The image had left poor Naruto quite stunned. Naruto. What happened to Hinata? Shino said with a touch of panic in his voice. However, being the observant person he is, He quickly noticed a pile of clothes nicely folded on a nearby rock. Once Shino looked closer, he realized that they were Hinata's clothes. Shino took one look at Naruto's stunned expression and put two and two together. Shino silently walked up to Kiba and grabbed his arm. Time to go. Hinata is fine. Well, she is physically unhurt. Wah, wait. What the hell are you talking about? Kiba yelled as Shino dragged him off towards their campground. Meanwhile, Hinata sighed with relief. Naruto seeing her like this was bad enough, but Shino and Kiba. She would have died if they had seen her. It was several moments later before Naruto found the courage to speak. He picked himself up and got out of the frigid water. He went over and grabbed Hinata's clothes and placed them above the rock Hinata was hiding behind. Hinata, I'm really sorry. I had no idea the girl was you. She was just so beautiful I couldn't help myself from getting closer. Hinata suddenly couldn't breathe. Naruto thinks I'm beautiful. Hinata shook her head violently. She couldn't afford to pass out here. She decided to keep herself busy by focusing on getting dressed. Suddenly, Hinata realized something was missing. She groaned quietly. She hated to ask Naruto this, but there was no she was leaving without it and she couldn't come out from behind the rock without them. Naruto. I think you forgot something. Hinata raised her hand above the rock and pointed towards where she had left her clothes. Naruto looked over and suddenly his face burst into a deep crimson. There was a pink lacy set of panties lying on the bank. They must have fallen aside when Naruto grabbed the clothes. Naruto took a deep breath and picked them up. He quickly walked over to Hinata and handed them to her over the rock. When Hinata's cold, wet hand met Naruto's warm one, she gripped his hand until she felt the smooth fabric. She clasped her hand around the fabric and accidentally grabbed Naruto's hand as well. The two were now holding hands with Hinata's pink underwear stuck between their hands. Hinata gasped and blushed deeply. She quickly pulled her underwear from his hand and groaned. This was the first time she had held hands with a boy, and her panties had been between their hands. Hinata wished she had never left the tent, or at least brought a swimsuit with her. Hinata didn't know how she could ever face Naruto again. Hinata quickly got dressed, jamming her wet legs through her underwear and pants. Once she had finished getting dressed, she slowly emerged from behind the rock. Naruto and Hinata were both blushing deeply and neither could seem to find their voice. Several minutes passed by and the only sound was the roaring of the falls. Hinata, please forgive me, I had no idea you were, Nake. Naruto mumbled. Hinata pulled her arms in front of her chest and began to nervously tap her fingers together. It's not your fault. I shouldn't have gotten Nake so close to the TT tent. Her voice broke on the last word as she started shivering uncontrollably. Naruto quickly walked off and removed his jacket and wrapped it around Hinata. Hinata smiled weakly. Thanks. Naruto returned the smile. Anytime. There was a long awkward silence and Naruto started to feel uncomfortable. His thought drifted back to a conversation he had with Sakura. Well, Naruto, how do I look? Sakura asked. She was in a long red dress. Her nose was powdered and her lips were ruby red. Her eyelashes were long and black and there was a trace of blush on her cheeks. You look like one of those girls Jiraiya is always hanging out with, Naruto replied. Sakura's brow twitched and flames erupted around her. Naruto. Sakura flew towards Naruto and punched him hard in the jaw. Ow. That hurt. Sakura. Why did you hit me? Naruto asked angrily. You are supposed to tell girls that they look pretty when they get all dressed up. Sakura screamed. Do you know how long I spent on just my hair? Naruto groaned. Girls are so complicated. Naruto rubbed his jaw tenderly, remembering the pain that Sakura had inflicted upon him that day. He felt that maybe he should compliment Hinata as well. Naruto didn't think Hinata was the type of girl who would hit him in the face, but it didn't hurt to be too careful. Hinata, you actually are a very pretty girl. Hinata suddenly stopped shivering. Her cheeks filled with color just as her eyes rolled back into her head and she passed out. Hinata, oh crap. Naruto slung Hinata onto his back and raced towards the campground. Minutes later, he burst through the tent, panting. Shino and Kiba were both sitting on the ground, eating a bowl of steaming ramen. Hey, Hinata needs help, Naruto shouted. Shino and Kiba looked up at Naruto and then down at Hinata. Then they both turned back around and continued to eat. Didn't you hear me? I said Hinata needs help. Naruto shouted again. Kiba waved his chopsticks at Naruto. You don't know Hinata like we do. She passes out like this all the time. Don't worry, she is just fine. Are you sure? Naruto asked hesitantly. Yes, Naruto. She is fine, Shino said without even looking at Naruto. He held up his hand to Naruto and in it was a third bowl of ramen. Yum, Naruto exclaimed as he set Hinata on the ground and began to eat his ramen. A while later, once all the boys were done eating their ramen, they set up the sleeping bags and placed Hinata gently inside hers. Moments later, they all were sound asleep in their individual bags. When Naruto awoke the next day, he found that the tent was empty. The other sleeping bags were gone as well. He emerged from the tent to see Kiba and Shino huddled around a map while Hinata stared after a wandering butterfly. Hinata looked up and her eyes met Naruto's. He gave her a flashy grin that warmed Hinata's heart. However, as the images of the previous night's events flashed through her memory, she promptly passed out again. Shino groaned aloud. This mission is never going to work if she keeps passing out. Hinata's Byakugan is an invaluable part of this mission and there is no point in continuing if she can't stay conscious. We are heading back. What? No way. We can't head back. What about the Baikochu? What about Sasuke? Naruto yelled in disbelief. Shino glared at Naruto and his voice turned stern. I am the leader of this group. What I say goes and I say we are going back. Do you have a problem with that? Naruto gulped. No, sir. Good. Now pack up your stuff. And somebody grab Hinata. Much later, the group arrived at the village with Naruto carrying Hinata on his back. They all head towards the Hokage's tower. Moments later, Naruto was knocking on Tsunade's door. Enter, Tsunade said from behind the door. They all walked through the door and Naruto set Hinata down in a nearby chair. I'm sorry, Tsunade. Our mission was a failure. Shino said monotonously. It hasn't even been 2 days. What happened? Tsunade asked. It took Shino several minutes to explain the situation. All the while, Tsunade's jaw kept dropping lower and lower. Naruto saw what? Tsunade shouted. Naruto hung his head in embarrassment. Luckily Hinata was still unconscious. Yes, it is true. And Hinata is having trouble coping with the situation. Tsunade sighed. All right, you are dismissed. However, leave Hinata here. Yes, Hokage. The 3 boys said in unison. They left the room, leaving Hinata slumped in her chair. Shizune. Tsunade called out. Yes, Shizune said as she stuck her around out from behind the door. I need you to get Hiashi for me. Tell him to meet me here immediately. Yes, Mom. Shizune bowed and left the room. About an hour later, Shizune arrived with Hiashi at her side. She walked Hiashi over to Tsunade's desk and then left the room. You wanted to see me, Lord Hokage? Hiashi asked respectfully. Yes. I have some strange news for you, Hiashi. Your daughter seems to have gotten herself into a troubling situation. It only took a moment for Tsunade to explain the situation, but Hiashi realized he was in huge trouble. If this situation wasn't handled correctly, there would be a big fuss in his clan. Hiashi sighed. I think we should wake Hinata. She needs to know what has to be done. Yeah, you're right, Tsunade said as she walked over to Hinata to wake her up. Hinata, come on now, we need to talk to about something. Hinata sat up forward in her chair, rubbing the sleep out of her eyes. What is going on? Hiashi cleared his throat. Hinata, Tsunade has told me that a boy saw you naked yesterday. Is this true? Hinata slumped. She barely managed to nod her head. Yes. She couldn't even imagine the lecture she was about to get. Do you plan on marrying him? Hiashi asked with a straight face. Hinata suddenly started choking. Mary N. Naruto. What or why you talking about? Hinata's face was the reddest it had ever been in her life. Hiashi sighed again. There is an ancient law in the Hyuga clan for a long time. Premarital dating or sexual activity has been strictly forbidden. If word gets out that a boy who is not your husband saw you naked, the Hyuga family will be disowned. So I have to marry Naruto. But I can't. You will. You are the heiress to the Hyuga name and you must protect its honor. Hinata gulped. She could have traveled back in time a week and told her past self that in a week Naruto would see her naked and become her husband. She would have told herself that she was crazy. But it was true. How could Hinata marry Naruto when she could hardly even talk to him without passing out? Maybe we should get Naruto up here. He should know about this as well. Tsunade said, breaking the long silence. Tsunade sent Shizune off to retrieve Naruto at once. She arrived several minutes dragging a bound Naruto behind her. I'm sorry, Tsunade. He was eating ramen and refused to come along with me. So I was forced to take drastic measures. Tsunade glared at Naruto and he gave her a sheepish grin. It's okay, Shizune. You may untie him now. Shizune removed the ropes and once Naruto was free, she left the room. Listen, Naruto. This is going to be very confusing for you. But you did see Hinata at the waterfall last night, right? Naruto blushed deeply. He looked over at Hinata who also had a deep blush on her face. His gaze drifted back towards Tsunade and he nodded his head. And you know that she was naked. But what you don't know is that the Hyuga family has an ancient tradition. Women are only allowed to be seen naked by their husbands. Naruto gulped loudly and Hinata's blush grew deeper. Husband. But I. Tsunade held up her hand to silence Naruto. I know. But this rule cannot be broken, so in order to protect the Hyuga name, you two must get married. Naruto's jaw hit the floor. We have to get married. Yes. Don't even try to get out of this one, Naruto. You have no choice in this matter. The actual ceremony will be in a few days. Hiashi stepped forward. As Hinata's husband, you will share her role as heiress and gain all the rights of a Hyuga. Then, when Hinata comes of age, you and her will become the leaders of the clan. Naruto was stunned. Leaders of the clan. Hiashi took a threatening step towards Naruto. If not for this stupid tradition, I would never even allow you in the Hyuga house's front gates. But, alas, I have no choice in this matter. But I swear to you, if you screw this up or break Hinata's heart, I will kill you. Naruto groaned. This was almost too much to believe. Tsunade laid a hand on Naruto's shoulder. You know, becoming a successful leader of the Hyuga clan is one more step closer to becoming the Hokage. You certainly would become a lot more popular. Naruto's eyes twinkled with determination. If he could do this, then becoming the Hokage would be a walk in the park. Naruto wrapped his hand into a fist and pumped it into the air. All right, Hokage, here I come. Hinata giggled to herself. She had to admit that marrying Naruto was a dream come true. But she had always imagined getting married when she was older. Suddenly, a thought occurred to Hinata. In a few days, she would have to marry Naruto. And that meant she would have to kiss him. Suddenly, Hinata's world shattered. She wasn't ready for this. She hadn't even had her first kiss yet and she was already getting married. Hinata. Hiashi said, snapping Hinata out of her thoughts. Why yes, father. Hinata mumbled, trying to avoid Naruto's piercing gaze. Come with Naruto and me. I'm going to take you two to your new house. New house? Naruto and Hinata asked in unison. Their eyes met and they both blushed. Yes. Naruto, your lousy apartment is no place for a Hyuga and Hinata's room can't fit two people. So I brought you a much bigger house. This house is big enough to hold you both and several kids if you choose to have any. Hinata's entire face turned crimson. She shook the thought of having kids with Naruto out of her head. Those thoughts would only make her pass out. Several minutes later, they arrived at a very luxurious house just behind the Hyuga complex. Hiyashi had obviously under-exaggerated the size of the house. It was big enough to hold 3 families at least. Hiyashi opened the huge doors and then handed the key to Naruto. I will leave you two alone for now. You must have a lot to talk about. Hiyashi then turned and left. Naruto and Hinata walked into the grand house and gaped at the amazing furniture. The house even had its own small pond in the center. And if possible, it looked bigger on the inside than it did from the outside. Naruto looked around the spacious house and then grinned at Hinata. Look at all this room. I guess we are going to have a lot of kids. Naruto said with a chuckle. No way. This house is huge. Naruto exclaimed. His loud voice echoed throughout the empty wooden mansion-like house. Naruto grinned when he heard his echoed voice and then proceeded to shout, "Believe it!" as loud as he could. Naruto's voice once again echoed and Naruto laughed in amusement. Hinata giggled at Naruto's antics, but she, too, was also impressed with the size of the house. She has lived in the Hyuga clan her entire life and she had never seen a house of this remarkable stature. I have been building it since Hinata turned 12 to prepare for this day. But I never thought this day would come so soon. Unfortunately, the house isn't complete yet, so you two will have to remain in the West Wing until construction is finished. Hiyashi said. Hinata's and Naruto's jaws dropped. So this is only the West Wing? Hinata asked incredulously. So cool. This place must have like 12 rooms. Naruto yelled excitedly. This house was just getting better by the second. 5 rooms to be exact. And when construction is completed there will be 13 bedrooms in all plus 7 bathrooms, a living room, and 2 kitchens. The West Wing only includes the living room, 1 kitchen, 5 bedrooms, and 1 bathroom. Also, we haven't had time to prepare the decorations and furnishings, so only 1 room has furniture. Fortunately, it is the biggest room. It is also your room. Hiyashi stepped next to a large wooden sliding door and slid it back. Naruto and Hinata gasped. The room was huge. It had soft velvet carpet all throughout the room, that is rare in Japan. There were 2 beautiful, hand-carved dressers on the east and west sides of the room. There was also a big sliding glass door that leads straight to the middle of the mansion where a small pond was. However, the thing that caught Naruto's eye was the gigantic bed in the middle of the room. It had silky smooth sheets and Naruto could tell just from looking at it that it was going to be as soft as a cloud. Hinata also noticed the bed. However, as smart as Hinata was, she quickly noticed a problem with the room. There was only 1 bed. Hinata's face filled with blood. There is only 1 bed. Naruto gulped and blushed as well. He hadn't thought of that. It's okay. I'll sleep in a different room. Hinata almost cried out. She didn't want to lose this opportunity to sleep in the same room as Naruto. Hinata bit her tongue to hold back her voice. She wanted to protest to Naruto's decision, but she didn't want to embarrass herself either. What should I say? Absolutely not. Hiyashi shouted out. Naruto and Hinata jumped at Hiyashi's raised voice. They both turned around to look him in the face. You two are getting married. And you must give the image of a married couple. You two will sleep in the same room. The Hyuga's honor is at stake. Yes, father. Hinata bowed with respect to her father, but inside she was cheering. Yay. I get to sleep in the same room as Naruto after all. Wait, I'm going to be sleeping in the same room as Naruto, alone, in the same bed, oh no. I can hardly even talk to him. How am I going to manage lying next to him? Relax, Hinata. Don't mess this up. Besides, if you pass out you are already in bed, so what's the worst thing that could happen? Hinata took a deep breath. She was right. She could manage to do this. She had to. She was about to become Naruto's wife after all. Wife. At that thought Hinata almost fainted. Her cheeks burned with color and she began to feel lightheaded. I'm going to go get ready for bed. And with that Hinata ran off towards the bathroom. Hiyashi and Naruto started after her, their eyebrows raised. Naruto shrugged and turned to walk into his new magnificent room. However, Hiyashi's firm grasp on his shoulder stopped him in his tracks. Wait, Naruto. Hinata is my eldest daughter and heir to the Hyuga clan. If you screw this up, I will kill you. Hiyashi's voice was deep and layered with hate. Naruto, being so accustomed to having people despise him, just shrugged and grinned at his soon-to-be father-in-law. Don't worry, I'll stay on top of her. Hiyashi's eye twitched. Surely this boy couldn't have meant. No, this boy was much too stupid. Just take care of my daughter. Hiyashi let his arm fall off of Naruto's shoulder and walked out the door. Naruto and Hinata were now all alone in their new giant house. Naruto walked into his room and looked around. He would have loved to just jump on the big soft bed, but he knew that rightly, the bed should go to Hinata since the house did belong to her family. So Naruto grabbed one of the large, fluffy blankets and made his own little bed right next to the door. He then yawned and laid down. Naruto was surprised at how comfy his little makeshift bed was. The blanket was obviously handcrafted and it was the softest thing Naruto had ever felt. The carpet was also very soft and made for excellent padding. He sighed happily and pulled the blanket around him. He could get used to living like this. Naruto was snoring within seconds. Meanwhile, Hinata was still in the bathroom. She had changed into her pajamas. Her pajamas were a pair of bottoms just like her usual ones in a purple tank top with straps going over her shoulders. She had debated for several minutes on whether she should wear a bra or not. It was terribly uncomfortable to sleep in, but she was asleep next to Naruto. She had ultimately decided not to wear one. Hinata brushed her teeth, combed her hair, and sprayed a splash of nightly perfume on herself. Hinata took one more glance into the mirror and took a deep breath. She opened the bathroom door and slowly walked towards her room. She slid the door back and almost tripped over Naruto's unconscious body. Hinata's spirits were instantly deflated. She had thought, almost hoped, that she and Naruto would be sharing the large bed. She had even used her special perfume. And he had just fallen asleep on the ground. What a waste. However, a small part of Hinata sighed in relief. She didn't know how she was going to handle sleeping in the same bed as Naruto. But now she didn't have to worry about that. Hinata carefully stepped over Naruto and collapsed on her new bed. What a day. And Hinata knew tomorrow was going to be just as crazy. She just couldn't believe she was going to get married to the boy of her dreams. I'm the luckiest girl in the world. Boy, this mattress sure is comfy. Seconds later, Hinata was fast asleep. End flashback. Hinata smiled to herself. She watched as Naruto's chest rose and fell with each breath. He was the cutest thing and soon he was going to be her husband. Suddenly, an idea popped into Hinata's head. Anytime she got close to Naruto she would begin to feel lightheaded and pass out. She needed to learn how to be close to him and keep her sanity. And what more perfect time is there to train than when he is asleep? Hinata silently pulled the covers off her and slithered off the bed. She managed to worm her way into Naruto's bed without waking him. The warmth emanating off Naruto surprised her. He was like a furnace. Hinata began to blush as she forced herself to get closer to Naruto. She kept moving until her face was inches away from Naruto's. Steam was practically coming out of Hinata's ears. Her entire face burned red and she began to pull back. Suddenly, Naruto stirred. Hinata, Naruto whispered. Hinata held her breath until she heard Naruto's faint snores. She sighed with relief. That was much too close. And was Naruto dreaming about her? For the first time in her life, Hinata wished she was Ino. That way she could get in Naruto's head and see what he was thinking. Naruto started to stir once more. But this time he rolled over and began to rub his eyes. Hinata gasped, stood straight up and burst out of the room. She kept running until she was in the bathroom. She slammed the door behind her and laid back against it, breathing heavily. She let herself slid to the floor. Her skin already felt cold from the absence of Naruto's body heat. Hinata shook her head. She needed a shower. Meanwhile, Naruto was just beginning to wake up. The images of his dream were just leaving his head. Hinata. Naruto gasped. Did he just moan Hinata's name out loud? He looked around and sighed in relief once he saw that Hinata was not in the room. What had he been dreaming about? He had the faint image of Hinata and water, and was Hinata Nak. The image quickly faded out of Naruto's head and Naruto was left grasping in the dark. Naruto shrugged and stretched. He reached up to take off his animal cap only to find that it was not there. Oh yeah, I need to move all my stuff at my old house to this house. Naruto got up and walked to the bathroom. He hadn't gone to the bathroom last night and his bladder was letting him know it was his first priority. Naruto yawned deeply and rubbed his eyes. It seemed his was still half asleep. And as such, he failed to think about where Hinata could possibly be and he also failed to hear the sounds coming from behind the bathroom door in front of him. Hinata had just finished rinsing the suds of her body. She turned off the water and stepped out of the shower. She was in the process of reaching for a towel when she heard the door handle rattle loudly. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized what was about to happen. She tried to scream a warning at Naruto, but the scream got stuck in her throat. The door opened and Naruto obliviously stepped in. He felt the heat in the air and noticed something was wrong. He looked up and his eyes met Hinata's. Once again, Naruto and Hinata were soused into the other's eyes. Time stood still and neither could look away. Suddenly, Hinata's brain clicked into place and she let out a loud scream. Naruto jumped in surprise. He looked down and finally noticed that Hinata was naked. However, there was not water to block his view like last time at the waterfall. Also, the bathroom was fully lighted. Naruto didn't miss a single aspect of Hinata's body. His virgin eyes swept over Hinata's body almost on their own accord. The only naked girl he had ever seen, before Hinata, was on a magazine that Naruto had used to perfect his seijutsu. However, the real thing was much different. It was more slender and vibrant. Hinata's skin looked silky smooth and Naruto could see the individual water droplets on her body. Her boobs weren't as big as the girls on the magazine, but they seemed to fit better and they bounced when Hinata moved. Hinata could feel Naruto's stare and quickly grabbed a towel and used it to cover her front. A deep blush soon covered her face. Naruto's trance was broken and he quickly ran out of the bathroom. I'm sorry. He has seen me naked. Twice now. Hinata felt like crying. Wait. I didn't pass out. I was so close to Naruto, and I was naked. Why didn't I pass out? Curiosity filled Hinata. And with it came a feeling Hinata wasn't familiar with. She felt reckless. There was nothing she could lose now. It was time to throw caution to the wind. Hinata took a deep breath and opened the bathroom door. Naruto heard the door open so he quickly covered his eyes with his hands. I'm sorry. Hinata exhaled deeply. It's okay, Naruto. It's not your fault. Besides, why you have already seen me naked. Naruto opened his fingers a bit. You're not mad at me. Hinata shook her head softly. I am going to be your wife after all. Go ahead and look if you want. Hinata loosened her grip on her towel and it fell to the floor. Naruto heard the towel hit the floor and he closed his eyes tightly. However, curiosity began to eat at Naruto until he could take it no longer. He slowly let his hands fall to his sides. He gazed down at Hinata's face. Her head was pointed down and it was a deep shade of red. His eyes kept traveling down Hinata's body. It was so different from his own body. Naruto had never seen anything like it. Suddenly, Sakura popped into Naruto's head. Wait, don't I like Sakura? Hinata sure is nicer than Sakura. If this had happened to Sakura, I would probably be in the hospital right now. There is something different about Hinata. Meanwhile, Hinata found that her own eyes were traveling down Naruto's body. Naruto's pants seemed to be tighter than they used to be and Hinata couldn't figure out why. Is he gaining weight? No, it seems to only be tight around one specific area. Suddenly, there was a loud knocking noise at the front door. Naruto and Hinata gasped. Hinata quickly bent over and grabbed her towel. She wrapped it around herself and ran into her room. Naruto, being the dressed one, went to go answer the door. It was Neji. Hiyashi invites you and Hinata to the main house where breakfast is being served. Neji said in a polite tone. Out of all the genin, Neji respected Naruto the most. He knew that if someone could change his cousin, it would be Naruto. After all, Naruto was the one who had changed him. Neji bowed politely and left. Naruto was confused. Why does everyone keep bowing to me? Am I supposed to bow back? Naruto shrugged and closed the door. His stomach rumbled loudly. Breakfast did sound good. Naruto walked back to his room and found that Hinata was already dressed in her usual outfit. Her blush had still not gone away though. However, Naruto's single-track mind had already forgotten about the previous event and was now focused on filling his stomach. Come on, Hinata. It's breakfast time. Naruto reached over and grabbed Hinata's hand. He then half-dragged her out the front door. Hinata blushed furiously at his touch. She had never held hands with a boy before. And Naruto's hand was so warm. Minutes later, after Hinata had led Naruto to the correct house, they all were seated around a big table, with Neji and Hiyashi seated on one side and Naruto and Hinata seated on the other. Several servants and cooks came bustling out of the kitchen and placed several steaming plates in front of Naruto and Hinata. When the servant pulled the top off the dish, Naruto became confused. Hinata, what is this stuff? Naruto asked. Hinata was also staring. I don't know, Naruto. Hinata was still flabbergasted to be sitting so close to Naruto. Hiyashi smiled. It's a traditional Western breakfast. That there is called bacon. That is called sausage, pancakes, scrambled eggs, and French toast. Hiyashi said as he pointed to several different foods. Hiyashi and Neji began to eat. Naruto tentatively grabbed a slice of bacon and put it into his mouth. Instantly, Naruto was overcome with flavor. It tasted like the pork in Ichiraku's ramen, but even better. Oh, wow, Hinata, you have to try this bacon stuff. Naruto then placed the rest of his slice of bacon into Hinata's mouth. Hinata didn't even have time to protest. Hinata couldn't believe how good bacon tasted. It was like nothing she had even tasted before. Both Naruto and Hinata began to dig into the foreign breakfast items in front of them. My god, these pancakes are so soft and sweet. What is this brown liquid on top of them? A fork. What is a fork? These eggs are delicious. Naruto didn't stop asking questions about the new and delicious food in front of him. Hinata was also amazed, but she let Naruto ask the questions for her. Hiyashi laughed. I thought you would like it. I tried some of it on a mission once and I loved it. When I got back to the village, I found that there is a store that sells all kinds of Western foods. Here, I will give you the address. Naruto eagerly accepted the piece of paper. He would definitely be visiting that store. But there was something else. Something was itching at the back of Naruto's mind. Wasn't he supposed to do something today? Oh yeah, Naruto suddenly exclaimed. I need to go back to my old apartment and get my stuff. Hiyashi nodded. You're right, Hinata. Go with Naruto and help him pack his things. Hinata nodded. She would have done it even if her father had not asked her to. Although it did give Hinata a legitimate reason to follow Naruto around all day. Naruto and Hinata excused themselves from the table and left the Hyuga complex. It only took a few minutes to get to Naruto's house, but they were in no hurry. So, Hinata, I thought you had a little sister. But I didn't see her at the table. Naruto said, trying to make small talk. Hinata sighed sadly. I don't get to see her very often. Father puts her through strict training. Oh, I'm sorry. You must really miss her. Sometimes. I still get to see her at night though, so it's not all that bad. That's good. I'd like to meet her sometime. She is going to be my sister-in-law soon. Hinata blushed. She already knows about you. I probably shouldn't have told Hanabi all that stuff. Here it is. Naruto shouted, interrupting Hinata's thoughts. He put his key in the lock and stepped into his old apartment. Hinata followed closely behind him. Hinata wandered around Naruto's house while Naruto went around packing his things into a box. Hinata knew Naruto was orphan and she knew he lived by himself his entire life, but as she looked around Naruto's apartment she felt even sadder. There were cobwebs everywhere, the paint was beginning to peel off, there were holes in the walls and the lights hardly worked. Naruto must have been so lonely. Seconds later, Naruto came out of his room with the box. It was hardly even half full. There were a few outfits, training materials, and a picture of Team 7. I'm done. Are you ready to head back? Naruto asked. Hinata was shocked. How could anyone survive on so little? Naruto was amazing. Where did his strength come from? Naruto grabbed Hinata's hands and they left the apartment for the last time. Naruto gave one last look at the apartment in which he had spent all his life. Memories came flooding back into his head. The third Hokage had given him this house out of pity. He had nowhere else to go and there weren't a lot of people willing to take him in. He remembered how the villagers used to throw rocks through his windows and egg his door. It had never been a nice place to live, but it was his home. Naruto was going to miss it. Several minutes later, Naruto and Hinata were back in their own room and were unpacking Naruto's belongings. Naruto placed his picture on top of one of the wooden dressers. He stared at the picture, remembering what it was like to be in Team 7. Hinata noticed Naruto's sadness and tried to console him. She placed a hand on his shoulder. Naruto, do you miss them? Yeah. Once Sasuke left, Sakura broke down. Now she hardly even leaves the hospital. She is constantly training under Tsunade. And Kakashi is always on some Jonin mission. I have been alone for quite a while now. Hinata, positioned right behind Naruto, wrapped her arms around him and rested her head on his shoulder. I know you feel lonely, Naruto. But I promise that I will always be here and I will never let you feel that way again. Isn't that what a wife is for? Naruto turned around and returned Hinata's hug. Thanks, Hinata. That means a lot to me. Naruto pulled his face back and looked into Hinata's eyes. Time stood still and Hinata couldn't breathe. Is he going to kiss me? Suddenly, there was a loud knocking at the door. Again. Naruto and Hinata broke their hug and both of them blushed. They went and answered the door together. It was Hinata's father. Good afternoon. May I come in? We have some matters to discuss. Of course, father. Let's go to the living room. Hinata said. Her father almost seemed to be out of breath. What was upsetting him? Once they all were seated in the living room, Hiashi spoke. I have spoken with the clan elders and we came up with two problems. Naruto and Hinata glanced at each other. What is it, father? Whose name will you take when you marry? Hinata gasped. She hadn't even thought about that. However, once she thought about it, the answer seemed pretty clear. Hinata Uzumaki. Once Hinata spoke the words, something clicked in head. She and Naruto were really getting married. Hinata could barely contain her excitement. No, you are a Hyuga. You will always be a Hyuga. Naruto shall change his name. What? Naruto and Hinata said in unison. No, that is not how I want it, father. I am going to take Naruto's name. It is custom for the wife to take the husband's name, isn't? I would be happy to be called Hinata Uzumaki. Hiashi was appalled. He had never seen his daughter stand up for anything. She had always done what she told without asking questions. Where was finding this new strength? Ahem. Hiashi regained his composure. I will take this into consideration. The second problem is that tradition requires that you consummate the marriage after the wedding, a honeymoon. Naruto and Hinata blushed furiously. However, you two are both much too young and so we have decided to postpone the wedding until you are at a more appropriate age. Hinata didn't mind so much. They were still going to be married. It didn't matter when. As long as she was with Naruto she was happy. We don't mind, Naruto said after sharing a glance with Hinata. Hiashi smiled. Good. Now, Hinata, please go upstairs. But, father. It's okay, Hinata. I'll be up there soon. Naruto said, trying to reassure Hinata. Hinata nodded and headed upstairs. Once Hinata was out of sight, Hiashi reached into his pocket and pulled out a little black box. He handed the little box to Naruto. Naruto opened it and gasped. Inside there was a beautiful diamond ring. It had a small diamond on it, and inside of the diamond there was a little lavender gem. It was absolutely stunning. It's Hinata's engagement ring. Once I leave, you will go upstairs and give it to her. Do you understand? Hiashi asked sternly. Why, yes. Good. I will see you tomorrow, son-in-law. Hiashi turned swiftly and left. Naruto slowly walked up to his room. He couldn't take his eyes off the ring. It must have cost a fortune. Hinata. Naruto called out as he opened the sliding door. Hinata was already in her pajamas lying on the bed. Yes, Naruto. What did my father want? Hinata's voice trailed off as she saw the black box. Naruto. Is that a? Hinata. Will you marry me? Naruto asked as he held up the ring. Hinata's heart skipped a beat. She didn't think it was possible to be this happy. Tears were flowing out of her eyes. Why, yes. Of course I will. Naruto slid the ring onto Hinata's ring finger. Hinata nearly squealed in delight. Once the ring was on her finger, she bounded off the bed and tackled Naruto with a hug. This was the happiest day in her life. It was dawn. The sun had just barely begun to peek over the faraway mountains. All was quiet in Konoha. Except for Naruto's stomach. Grrrmmm, Naruto grumbled as he awoke. His stomach was hungry and it wanted food. It couldn't understand that Naruto had been up all night listening to Hinata sleep. It couldn't know that Naruto now had a fiancé. All it could understand was that it was empty and it needed food now. Naruto rose out of bed quietly as to not wake up Hinata. As he silently got dressed, he kept one eye of Hinata's chest, watching it rise and fall with each breath. As he turned to leave, he realized that it was pretty hard to tear his gaze off Hinata's chest. He was also surprised to find that he had begun to stare at Hinata's breasts. He shook his head and walked out of the room. What was with these thoughts he kept having? Why were these dirty thoughts constantly bombarding his mind? Naruto's stomach growled again. Oh, that's right. Food first, strange thoughts later. Naruto started walking to Ichiraku's ramen shop. Whilst he was walking, Naruto casually stuck his hands into his pockets. As he did so, his hand unexpectedly came into contact with a piece of paper. He pulled out the piece of paper and read the scribbled writing on it. It was an address which Naruto didn't seem to know. Suddenly, Naruto remembered the Western breakfast he had eaten the day before. Hiashi had written down the store's address on the piece of paper. Naruto was suddenly faced with a tough decision. He had never passed up the opportunity to have ramen, but that Western food was amazing. Maybe I should just check out the store, Naruto thought to himself as he changed his direction to head towards the unfamiliar address. A bell jingled as Naruto walked into the store. A neon sign outside the store read "The Setting Sun." Good morning, sir. How may I help you? An elderly man said from behind a counter. Naruto gasped. This was the first time in his entire life a store owner had actually welcomed him. Was it possible that the owner didn't know who Naruto was? Hello, mister. I was wondering, what could I get to eat in here? Naruto asked as he looked around at the endless amount of bright boxes, cans and bottles. Well, have you ever eaten Western food before? The elderly man replied. Yeah, sorta, I have tried bacon. The man smiled. That's good. Bacon is one of the greatest Western foods. But here are some other things I suggest you try. The old man then slowly walked around the store and gathered several things into his arms. He then placed all the items on the counter and gestured for Naruto to come over. This is a cupcake. This is ice cream, chicken wings, cheeseburger, hot dogs, and this. This is peanut butter. The man said with excitement. Peanut butter. Yes. Peanut butter goes great with anything. Bread, pancakes, celery, pretzels, and pretty much anything else. The old man then put all of the food into a large plastic bag. Ah, I almost forgot. You are going to need to learn how to cook these things. The old man pulled out a large box and set it next to Naruto's bags. This is a portable toaster oven. It will cook almost anything and can even grill your hamburgers. Naruto eyed the large box carefully. I'm not sure, mister. How much will all of this cost me? The old man's eyes twinkled. Not a penny. The first purchase is entirely free. Just promise me you will come back and try my other merchandise. Naruto broke out in a huge grin. Absolutely. Hey mister. What's your name? My name is Paul Johnson. But you can call me Gramps. All the young children do. Great. My name is Naruto. Remember it because one day it will be the name of the greatest Hokage who ever lived. The old man chuckled. I'm sure it will be. Now run along and try your new food. Naruto turned to head towards the door, but a sudden, piercing thought stopped him cold. Hey Gramps, how long have you been here? Well, only about a year or so. Why? Naruto smiled again. No reason. That's why he doesn't know who I am. Naruto skipped back home with a bounce in his step and a smile on his face. He was glad to have made a friend out of the old man. Also, he couldn't wait to try all the new foods the old man had given him. Meanwhile, Hinata had just woken up. She reached her hands up to rub her eyes, but something on her hand stopped her. It was the ring Naruto had given her the previous night. She held up the ring to the sunlight and it sparkled brilliantly. Hinata couldn't have been happier. She was about to marry the boy of her dreams and she had a gorgeous ring to prove it. Hinata rolled over to the edge of her bed to stare at her fiancé. However, the bed was empty and Naruto's animal cap had been folded and placed neatly upon his pillow. Hinata abruptly sat up in her bed. Where had her fiancé gone? Hinata got out of her bed, walked throughout the house in search of Naruto. She had just begun to panic when the front door opened and shut loudly. Hinata rushed towards the front entrance and her face lit up when she saw Naruto standing there with several bags in her hands. She ran up to her fiancé and threw herself into his arms, causing him to lose balance and drop the bags. Also, the sudden unexpected weight caused Naruto to stagger back and lean his back against the closed door for support. Hinata smiled up at him and Naruto could not help smiling back. Naruto's gaze drifted down to Hinata's bare shoulders and his face grew red. The straps to Hinata's nightgown had slipped off her shoulders and now the top half of her chest was exposed. Naruto's body tensed and he found himself staring at Hinata's now exposed cleavage. Hinata noticed his staring and looked down. When she realized she was exposed, her face turned almost as red as Naruto's, but she did not back away. She was getting used to this naked thing. Naruto was starting to feel awkward. He wished Hinata would just pull up her nightgown already, he just couldn't take his eyes off her chest. Hinata's shyness started to get the best of her and she backed up out of Naruto's grasp. Naruto immediately gained his composure and bent over to pick up his bags. Hinata. Sorry for leaving so early. I went out and bought some of that delicious, Western, food. Want to try some with me? Hinata smiled. Naruto was always thinking about food. She followed Naruto into their kitchen where Naruto was already pulling things out of the bags. She walked over and planted herself right next to Naruto. So close that they were practically touching. Naruto smiled to himself every time they touched and Hinata couldn't help but smile at the small blush Naruto was wearing on his cheeks. Let's have pancakes for breakfast. Naruto said, trying to pronounce the name on the label. Hinata thought this was very cute and giggled quietly. Naruto read off the materials and ingredients while Hinata maneuvered around their very large kitchen and put everything onto the countertop. The couple was ready to cook their first meal together. It says we need to pour this powder stuff into a big bowl and add water. Naruto read off the instructions while Hinata poured a small bag of pancake mix into a bowl and added water. Now stir it. Hinata did as Naruto instructed. Pour the batter onto a frying pan and flip when needed. Sounds easy enough, right Hinata? Hinata nodded as she carefully poured a small amount of batter onto the pan. The batter flowed into a circle once it hit the pan. I wonder when we are supposed to flip it, Naruto said as he inspected the cooking pancake. As soon as Naruto spoke, the pancake started to become a bit more solid. I think it's ready now, Hinata said. She reached over and flipped the pancake with a spatula she found in one of the kitchen drawers. The couple continued to flip and monitor the pancake until it was a light golden brown. Think it's done? Hinata asked. I'm not sure. It looks solid enough. Let's try it. Naruto pulled the pancake off the pan and set it on a plate. He bit a piece off and handed the plate to Hinata. Naruto's face contorted in thought and he chewed on the pancake. How is it? Hinata wondered. Naruto swallowed and he shrugged. It was alright, I guess. It could be sweeter. Wait. I think you are supposed to put something on it. Oh, what was it? Naruto remembered back to something the old man had said. Peanut butter goes great with anything. I think we are supposed to put peanut butter on it, Naruto said. Peanut butter? Hinata replied. She had never heard of it before. Yeah, it's that brown stuff over there, Naruto said, pointing a small container. Hinata walked over and grabbed the jar. She placed the jar next to Naruto. Naruto grabbed the jar and spun open the lid. He then dipped his pancake into the peanut butter. However, the tough sticky peanut butter held on to the pancake and tore a piece of the pancake off. Naruto pulled back the pancake in surprise. What the? How are you supposed to get the stupid stuff on the pancake? Oh wait. Naruto left the room and returned with a kunai. He then dipped the kunai into the jar and used the flat edge to spread the peanut butter on the pancake. Naruto smiled at his accomplishment and bit into the pancake once again. This time Naruto's face lit up. Oh wow. This peanut butter stuff is great. Hinata poked her finger into the jar and pulled out a bit of peanut butter. She then stuck her finger into her mouth. Wow. You were right, Hinata replied as she licked the rest of the peanut butter off her finger. Naruto took another bit and then a third. Only half the pancake was left. But it still could be sweeter. His eyes wandered around the room and he noticed a picture of a pancake on one of the items Joe had given him. It was a tall bottle filled with a dark liquid. On the label it said, syrup. Maybe this is meant for pancakes as well, Naruto said as he opened the bottle and poured the liquid onto his pancake. Naruto bit into the newly updated pancake. Holy crap. This is so good. Hinata, you have to try this. Naruto cut a piece of the pancake off and held it up to Hinata's face. Hinata blushed slightly and opened her mouth. Naruto stuck the piece in and then licked the syrup off his fingers. Yes, they are using their hands. They haven't discovered a fork yet. Naruto. This stuff is incredible, Hinata said. You were right. The syrup makes it very sweet. I like pancakes. Me too. I'm going to go and buy more pancake powder. Naruto got up and practically ran out the front door. Hinata smiled to herself. Naruto was so spontaneous. She really enjoyed that part of him. Meanwhile, Naruto was already halfway to the store. He rounded a sharp curve in the road and ran straight into somebody. Naruto bounced back and landed right on his rear. Ow! Naruto moaned. Hey, why don't you watch where you are going, Naruto? Naruto looked up. Jiraiya. What are you doing here? Jiraiya reached down and pulled Naruto to his feet. I was looking for you. You ready for some mid-morning training? Of course. Naruto Uzumaki never passes on a chance to train. Naruto yelled happily, forgetting all about Hinata and pancakes. Jiraiya smiled. I figured as much. Follow me. Jiraiya led Naruto deep into a forest where they could train in private. Okay, Naruto. Here's what I want you to do. Hold out your hand and concentrate chakra in your palm. Like this? Naruto asked as he held out his hand, palm down. No, like this. Jiraiya reached over and turned Naruto's hand palm up. Except when Jiraiya pulled his hand back, he was met with a slight resistance. Naruto, why are your hands sticky? Suddenly, Jiraiya jumped back. Gross. Wash your hands after you do that. Naruto was confused. Do what? Jiraiya blinked. You know, butter the corn. Choke the chicken. Quote. Naruto stared blankly. You have got to be kidding me. You know, touch yourself. Jiraiya said as a slight blush appeared on his face. He looked down to avoid eye contact with Naruto. I don't get it, Naruto said. Wait. No one has ever told you about, say. What is that? Naruto asked. Suddenly his eyes brightened. Is that like a jutsu? I saw that word in a magazine once when I was studying my S.Y. jutsu. Jiraiya rolled his eyes. No, it's not a jutsu, you idiot. It's when a guy and a girl. Minutes later. What? Naruto yelled. That's what it's for. Jiraiya sighed. Yes. Naruto gulped. So when I saw Hinata naked, oh crap. Wait, you saw that little Hyuga girl naked? Jiraiya was astonished. Twice actually, but it was by accident. Naruto yelled defensively. And now we are engaged. Jiraiya stared at Naruto in disbelief. Wait a minute, you saw that girl naked? And now you're going to get married to her? Yeah, it's some ancient Hyuga rule or tradition or something. Naruto grumbled and folded his arms stubbornly. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow. You never have been the type to follow rules or traditions. Naruto sighed and his face softened. I know, but I feel guilty about seeing Hinata, and if this is what I have to do to fix it, then that's what I will do. And, there is something else, I have never had a family before, but now I have a father-in-law and a fiancé and a whole clan that will soon become my family. I have had dreams about having a family, but none of them were as good as this. I could never have imagined having a huge family like this. I'm happy. Jiraiya smiled and nodded. He was very skeptical when Naruto had said he was getting married, but now he thought there was some merit to this situation. It was very possible that this relationship could work itself out to be a happy marriage. Jiraiya almost felt proud of his disciple. That's very good, Naruto. But what about that Hyuga girl, Hinata? Is she happy? Naruto's brow crinkled in thought. I don't know, I think so. Well, what have you done to make her happy? Jiraiya asked. Naruto thought for another moment and then hung his head. Not much, nothing at all really. Well then, I think you know what you should be doing right now. Naruto smiled up at Jiraiya. You're right, Naruto shouted as he took off running into the setting sun. Thoughts on how to make Hinata happy filled his mind as he ran. What makes Hinata happy? She seemed to like the ring that Hiashi told me to give to her. Ah. I don't have much money. Oh, I know. I will take her to Ichiraku's. I'm always in a good mood when I'm there. It's perfect. Naruto picked up speed as he raced back home, determined to make Hinata happy. Meanwhile, Hinata was just about to finish cleaning up the remaining pancake mess in the kitchen. Naruto had been gone for longer than Hinata had expected, but she didn't mind having some time alone to catch her breath after sharing such an intimate moment with Naruto. She held her hand up to her soft gray jacket and felt her racing heart. She had felt like a wife when she was cooking with Naruto. She couldn't remember a time when she was happier than when she was with Naruto. Whenever he was around, he was the only thing on her mind. Nothing else in the world existed to her except Naruto. Hinata's heart jumped when she heard a sharp rapping at the front door. Naruto. I'm coming. Hinata ran excitedly to the front door and swung it open vigorously. Her heart almost melted when he scooped her into a big hug with a warm smile on his face. Put your shoes on. We are going out, Naruto said as he set Hinata back on the ground. Oh out. Like out. Like ADD date. Hinata's voice trembled with a mixture of excitement, anxiety, and surprise. I guess you could call it that, yeah. A date. We are engaged, right? Naruto said with a slight blush on his face. Hinata nodded, her face also lighting up in a deep crimson blush. Why yeah, we are. I kinda forget sometimes. Naruto laughed. Me too. It feels like some crazy dream and I'm going to wake up in my old bed, but that never happens. I just keep waking up beside you in our new house. And, I like it. Hinata gasped silently. Maybe he does really like me. I mean, you have such a huge family, and I have never had one, and now I am part of yours. It's all so confusing, but I think I like it. Hinata's shoulders sagged. Oh, so he just likes having a family, That makes sense, I guess I'm nothing special after all. But that's not the only thing I like. I like you, Hinata. Naruto said quietly. Hinata gulped. She could feel her heart hammering away in her throat. He does like me. You were the only girl in our school who wasn't chasing after Sasuke. I always respected you for that. I know I never really paid attention to you in school, but that's why I'm happy this marriage thing happened. It gave me the chance to get to know you. You are such a kind and generous girl, Hinata. I noticed that when you gave me that medicine in the Chunin exams. No one else had ever done something like that for me. Hinata's face burned a darker shade of crimson and she broke her gaze from Naruto and stared at the ground. Naruto, I don't know what to say, I have always admired you, you were so strong and you never gave up. You were the complete opposite of me. But when I'm around you, I feel like I'm strong too. Like I have the strength to change into whatever kind of person I want to be. Hinata's emotions were all spilling out of her. She felt tears fill up in her eyes and she tried blinking them back. It was time to tell Naruto how she felt. Naruto, ILO. Hey Naruto. Hey Hinata. A voice shouted from behind Naruto. Hinata looked over Naruto's shoulder and saw Sakura and Ino walking towards them. Hinata looked down and the sparking engagement ring on her hand and had one thought. Oh, put your shoes on. We are going out, Naruto said as he set Hinata back on the ground. Oh out. Like out. Like ADD date. Hinata's voice trembled with a mixture of excitement, anxiety, and surprise. I guess you could call it that, yeah. A date. We are engaged, right? Naruto said with a slight blush on his face. Hinata nodded, her face also lighting up in a deep crimson blush. Why yeah, we are. I kinda forget sometimes. Naruto laughed as he and Hinata walked out the front door. Me too. It feels like some crazy dream and I'm going to wake up in my old bed, but that never happens. I just keep waking up beside you in our new house. And, I like it. Hinata gasped silently. Maybe he does really like me. I mean, you have such a huge family, and I have never had one, and now I am part of yours. It's all so confusing, but I think I like it. Hinata's shoulders sagged. Oh, so he just likes having a family, that makes sense, I guess I'm nothing special after all. But that's not the only thing I like. I like you, Hinata. Naruto said quietly. Hinata gulped. She could feel her heart hammering away in her throat. He does like me. You were the only girl in our school who wasn't chasing after Sasuke. I always respected you for that. I know I never really paid attention to you in school, but that's why I'm happy this marriage thing happened. It gave me the chance to get to know you. You are such a kind and generous girl, Hinata. I noticed that when you gave me that medicine in the Chunin exams. No one else had ever done something like that for me. Hinata's face burned a darker shade of crimson and she broke her gaze from Naruto and stared at the ground. Naruto, I don't know what to say, I have always admired you, you were so strong and you never gave up. You were the complete opposite of me. But when I'm around you, I feel like I'm strong too. Like I have the strength to change into whatever kind of person I want to be. Hinata's emotions were all spilling out of her. She felt tears fill up in her eyes and she tried blinking them back. It was time to tell Naruto how she felt. Naruto, ILO. Hey Naruto. Hey Hinata. A voice shouted from behind Naruto. Hinata looked over Naruto's shoulder and saw Sakura and Ino walking towards them. Hinata looked down at the sparking engagement ring on her hand and had one thought. Oh. Hey Sakura, what are you doing? Naruto asked in a slightly annoyed tone. Hinata blushed and quickly hid her ring hand behind her back. We were just on our way to catch something to eat. Wanna join us? Or are we interrupting something? Sakura said with a coy grin. Both Naruto and Hinata blushed. No. We, met on the way. We are heading to Ichiraku's. Naruto said. That sounds good. Let's all go together. Sakura said with a bright smile. Hinata silently cursed Sakura. This was supposed to be a date. Why did she have to come along and ruin it? But she put on a false smile and continued walking with Naruto towards Ichiraku's. Moments later, they were seated at Ichiraku's with Naruto sitting in between Hinata and Sakura and Ino sitting to the right of Hinata. It sure had been a while since we did something together, huh, Naruto? What have you been up to? Sakura said. Naruto glanced at Hinata and gulped. Mostly training with Jiraiya. Naruto said, praying that Sakura would believe the lie. Sakura laughed. I'm not surprised. Naruto sighed with relief. But you have to remember to take it easy every now and then. I have seen the way you train, Naruto. You won't stop until you can't even stand up anymore. You could really hurt yourself that way. Sakura said, laying a hand on Naruto's shoulder. Hinata was overcome with jealousy. She glared at Sakura's hand, silently wishing she could be as bold as Sakura was. There was a moment of awkward silence as Sakura's hand drifted gently down Naruto's shoulder and across his cheek. Sakura suddenly withdrew her hand and blushed. There was another moment of awkward silence before Tenchi finally brought out 3 steaming bowls of ramen. Let's chow down, Naruto exclaimed, happy as he broke apart his chopsticks and dug into his favorite food. Hinata allowed herself a slight giggle before reaching for her own pair of chopsticks. However, as her outstretched hand caught the sunlight, a stray beam of light caught Ino's attention. Oh my, Hinata, what is that on your hand? Ino said as her hand flew to her agape mouth. Ino quickly grabbed Hinata's left hand and brought it closer to her face. Hinata, why do you have an engagement ring? Damn you, Hinata thought to herself. Hinata thought fast and quickly threw a false smile onto her face and faked a blush. My father arranged a marriage for me to serve our clan's best interests. This caught both Ino and Sakura's interest. What? They shouted in unison. Oh my god. Who is the guy? Do we know him? Come on, Hinata. You have to tell us everything. Ino said, bursting with excitement. Hinata was overcome with questions. The blush on her cheeks was real this time. And no. Well, why yes. He is, Do you love him? Sakura asked. Hinata gave a small, eep. And her face exploded in color. Meanwhile, Naruto, who was in the middle of slurping down noodles, started violently coughing and spraying soup everywhere. Ino and Sakura paid no attention to Naruto and focused intently on Hinata. Hinata, however, wasn't exactly strong under pressure and she began to swoon faintly. Ino and Sakura caught her before she fell and carried her out. Sorry, Naruto, Sakura said as she slung Hinata's arm over her shoulder. We are going to take Hinata into town for some, girl business. Help yourself to our ramen. She then walked off with Ino, Hinata in tow. Naruto stared after Hinata's unconscious body. Throughout Naruto's life there had been many adjectives he would have used to describe Hinata, such as quiet, shy, weird, dark, and awkward. However, in the past few days, Naruto's opinion of Hinata had begun to change. He had several new adjectives to describe Hinata, such as kind, soft, and trustworthy. However, looking upon Hinata's red, unconscious face, Naruto could think of only one word to describe her. Cute. Tenchi frowned as he realized Naruto was not even touching his ramen. He seemed to be really deep in thought. Hey Naruto, what's up with that face? Father. Naruto clearly is worried about his girlfriend. Ayame said, elbowing her father in the side. Actually, she isn't my girlfriend. She is my fiancé. Naruto smiled brightly and walked out, leaving Ayame and her father with their jaws touching the ground. Meanwhile, Hinata was just starting to regain consciousness. She looked around frantically, realizing that she wasn't with Naruto anymore. Finally waking up, Hinata sat up and tried to identify the voice. It was Ino. Suddenly everything made sense. She had fainted and Ino and Sakura had carted her off too. Where are we? Hinata asked. There were a lot of clothes around her, but nothing seemed familiar. Ino smirked and tossed her hair back. We are in one of the most expensive clothing shops in town. And it just so happens that this store is quite skilled in making beautiful wedding kimonos. Hinata gasped as Sakura walked up to her with a red and lavender wedding kimono. I'm sure this would look beautiful on you, Hinata. Hinata backed away from the dress as fast as she could. No. You understand. I see can't. I am mean. My father already has a dress picked out for me. It would be rude of me to wear anything else. Hinata lied. Sakura put the kimono back and smiled. That's fine. I almost forgot you were part of the Hyuga clan. I bet they probably have everything already set up. Hinata faked a laugh. Yeah, it's almost like I don't have a choice. Ino and Sakura laughed. Well, I'm sure we could go get some dumplings since we skipped out on our ramen. Sakura suggested. That sounds great. Besides, I want to hear all the details of this engagement. Ino said as she pulled Hinata out of the store and towards a dumpling stand. Moments later, the three girls were seated at a table and eating their dumplings. Except for Hinata. Her dumplings remained untouched. Her stomach was doing cartwheels and Hinata really didn't think she could hold any food down. She wasn't sure she could handle these intensive questions any longer. Come on, Hinata. You haven't told us anything about this guy. We want to know all the dirty details. Ino said with a giggle. Hinata blushed slightly as the image of her standing NKE in front of Naruto popped into her head. There isn't that much to tell. Don't be like that, Hinata. Are you engaged to that Neji kid? Ino asked with the common sense that only a blonde can have. Hinata spluttered and coughed. Neji is my cousin. Ino smirked. Oh, so it's a forbidden love. Don't worry, I can keep a secret. Ino said with a wink. Sakura kicked Ino in the shin. You idiot. Hinata is not engaged to Neji. But, are you at least being married to a Hyuga? No. He isn't part of my clan. Hinata said as her cheeks burned with color. Both Ino and Sakura did a double take. Wait, I thought you had to be married to a member of the Hyuga clan. Isn't that a rule? Sakura said as her face contorted in thought. Hinata smiled softly. Normally that is the tradition. But this is a special case. Ino squealed with delight. Ooh, now I am even more curious. You have to tell us who this guy is. Come on. Sakura grabbed Hinata's left hand and examined her ring. This really is a beautiful ring. This guy must really care for you. Hinata blushed and pulled back her hand. She began to nervously tap her fingertips together. Do you really think so? Sakura and Ino nodded. It's obvious. Now tell us who this guy is. Ino whined. It's Naru. Hinata's voice began to tremble with embarrassment. Part of her wanted to keep their engagement a secret, but Sakura and Ino's constant badgering was weakening her fortitude. However, Sakura put two and two together and her jaw hit the floor. No way. Is it Naruto? Hinata gasped and her face turned a violent shade of crimson. Her fortitude had been completely destroyed. She abruptly stood up and ran off without saying a word. Ino turned back to Sakura and smirked. I'm assuming that is a yes. Definitely. Sakura said as she stood up. Are we going to follow after her? Ino asked as she stood up as well. Definitely. I am getting a bit curious myself. Sakura ran off with Ino right behind her. Meanwhile, Naruto was wandering around town wondering what he could do to make Hinata happy. Jiraiya's words bounced around in his head. It was true. What had he done to make Hinata happy? She had given him a house and family and he had done nothing for her. She did seem to enjoy cooking, maybe she would like it if he cooked her a homemade dinner. But, Naruto had never made anything besides ramen in his whole life. Maybe Joe would have some ideas. A bell rang as Naruto walked into the setting sun. Well, hello Naruto. How are you doing? Did you enjoy the food I gave you yesterday? Joe asked with a warm smile. Yeah, me and my friend made pancakes. They were really good, but they made my hands sticky. Joe roared with laughter. You dunce. You have to use a fork. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Fork. It looks like a miniature trident. It should be in one of those packages I gave you. Oh, anyways, I was wondering if I could ask you something. Naruto asked nervously. Joe seemed like a really nice guy, but no store owner had ever helped with anything before. Of course. Joe replied with a big grin. Naruto could almost feel the warmth emanating from Joe's smile. This man really seemed to care. I was planning a special dinner for my friend, and I was wondering if you had any ideas. I have just the thing. It is a special I brought with me from France. It's called escargot. Sounds good. I'll take it. Just follow the instructions on the side of the box. Joe said as he placed a large box into a bag. Got it. Naruto said as he grabbed the bag from Joe. Moments later, Naruto was back home in his giant kitchen. He was a bit disappointed when he saw Hinata wasn't home, but at least he would be able to surprise her with dinner when she got back. Naruto carefully followed each instruction on the box. He wanted this dinner to be perfect. Suddenly, he heard a faint noise near the front door. He quickly threw open the door expecting to see Hinata. However, no one was there. The noise was coming from the heavy rain that had just started to pour down. Hinata. Naruto hoped she was okay. Quit your worrying. Hinata is a ninja. She isn't going to be bothered by a little rain. Naruto headed towards the bathroom. The box said to leave the food in the oven for 30 minutes, so Naruto figured he would shower real quick. He stripped off all his clothes and jumped into the shower, without realizing there were no towels hanging on the rack. Moments later, Hinata stepped in through the front door. Her hair was dripping wet and it clung to her face. Her clothes were drenched. She headed upstairs in desperate need of a hot shower. Hinata stepped into her new giant, luxurious house, defeated and wet. Sakura and Ino's pestering had shaken Hinata's mentality, and walking home in the heavy rain had made it even worse. She was both physically drained and mentally exhausted. She desperately needed a warm, soothing shower. However, unbeknownst to Hinata, Naruto had just gotten out of the shower. He looked around the bathroom, dreading what he just realized to be true. There were no towels in the bathroom. Oh well, Hinata isn't home yet, so I should be able to make it to the laundry room to grab a towel. Naruto cautiously opened the bathroom door. The warm steam from the shower was quickly soothed through the open door, and a cold blast of air conditioning blew into the shower. The cold breath of air glanced across Naruto's wet skin, chilling him to the bone and making him frantic to get a towel. He burst out of the bathroom and make a break for the laundry room. He rushed past his bedroom door, and as he turned the corner of the hallway he ran right into something solid. The object fell backwards onto her butt with a loud, oof. Naruto gazed down at the object and gulped. There was no way this was happening. Why did Hinata have to arrive at this inopportune moment? Hinata, however, was slightly dazed from the fall, so she didn't recognize what was in front of her for a moment. It only took her a moment to realize what had happened. A very knacked Naruto had ran into her and knocked her to the ground, aligning her body so that she was on eye level with Naruto's waistline. Hinata almost went cross-eyed, staring at the appendage only inches from her face. Hinata let out a piercing scream and fell back onto the floor, unconscious. Naruto quickly fell to her side and called out her name. However, a piece of Hinata's jacket rubbed against Naruto's bare thigh and he realized he was still quite knacked. He ran into the nearby bedroom and put some dry clothes on. But at that point it didn't really matter. Naruto's image would forever be burned into Hinata's memory. After he was properly dressed, Naruto ran back out to Hinata's unconscious body. He softly picked her up and carried her to her bed. While he was carrying her, Naruto realized that she was completely soaked. She needed to get out of these wet clothes or else she was going to get sick. Naruto carefully laid her down on her bed. He blushed slightly and pulled down the zipper on her jacket. Underneath the jacket, Hinata was wearing a tight undershirt that loudly reminded Naruto of Hinata's slender curves. Naruto placed one hand over his eyes and pulled off the undershirt. He also managed to pull off Hinata's sweatpants with one hand. However, as he threw the wet clothes into the laundry hamper, Naruto realized that the rain had soaked right through Hinata's clothes to her underwear. Naruto gulped and his blush grew deeper. He gently flipped Hinata onto her back, trying to protect her dignity as much as possible. He avoided looking at Hinata's bare skin and instead focused on the clasp that bound Hinata's black bra together. He tried poking it, pulling it, pushing it, and yet he could still not figure out how to take it off. It puzzled him on why Hinata would go through the trouble of putting this on every day. Naruto finally gave up and used a kunai to cut the bra off. He then pulled down Hinata's underwear and threw them into the hamper. Naruto smiled to himself. He was fairly proud that he had accomplished all this without having any indecent thoughts. However, Naruto found that his gaze was slowly drifting along Hinata's slender back. Her skin seemed so soft and smooth. His gaze kept drifting all the way down to Hinata's bare butt. Naruto quickly shook his head and threw a blanket over the top of Hinata, trying to the image out of his mind. But the more he tried to resist thinking about it, the more it wormed itself into his thoughts. Naruto reluctantly found himself remembering when Hinata was dancing knack at the water. He remembered seeing her developing chest when she dropped her towel the other day. He remembered staring at her. Ding! The alarm on the oven quickly snapped Naruto back to reality and he rushed downstairs to save his burning dinner. Naruto pulled out the tray of foul-smelling, slimy escargot. Naruto pulled out a clump of what felt like solid snot and put it into his mouth. He immediately spat the clump out and ran over to the sink to rinse the foul flavor out of his mouth. That was disgusting. Naruto yelled as he silently cursed Joe for suggesting that he actually eat that crap. Naruto grabbed the tray and threw it and all its contents into the garbage. Meanwhile, Hinata had begun to stir. She sat up in her bed, wondering how she got into her room. Her face exploded in color when she remembered what she had seen right before passing out. Naruto was one well-toned guy. His muscles were very well defined and just thinking about them made Hinata lightheaded. Hinata shuddered slightly and hugged herself. She had seen Naruto knack. Hinata almost felt like giggling. Suddenly, Hinata realized she had no shirt on. She lifted the blanket off herself to check. My god, why am I knack? Hinata jumped out of bed and ran into her closet to put some clothes on. Had Naruto completely undressed her after she passed out? Why would he do something like that? Suddenly, there was a spark of excitement inside Hinata. Wait, if he undressed me, then maybe that means he likes seeing me knack. Does that mean he likes me? Hinata sat back down on the bed and rubbed her head. What did this mean? Yeah, they were getting married, but did Naruto actually like her? What did she mean to him? There was a soft knock on the door and Hinata gasped silently. She quickly straightened her hair and walked over to open the door. Naruto, you don't need to knock. This is your room, too. Hinata said with a smile. Her previous thoughts were forgotten when she saw his smiling face. Sorry, I guess I am still not used to the whole marriage thing yet. Naruto said sheepishly. There was an awkward moment of silence as both of them blushed and stared at their toes. Hinata bent over and picked up her discarded black bra which had been cleanly cut in two. Hinata held up the two halves to Naruto and he burst out laughing. I'm sorry, I couldn't figure out how to get it off. Hinata giggled. I guess I will have to show you sometime. Hinata blushed a deep crimson as soon as she realized what she had just said. Am I flirting? Naruto blushed and resisted the urge to look at Hinata's chest. He gazed over Hinata's body and gulped. She was wearing a tight, purple t-shirt and some baggy pajama bottoms. For the second time today, the word cute formed in his mind. Hinata felt Naruto's gaze sweep over her body and her cheeks burned with color. So, why did you undress me? Hinata mumbled, avoiding eye contact with Naruto. Well, you were soaked to the bone, and, I didn't want you to get sick. Hinata was both relieved and disappointed at the same time. She was glad he had undressed her only because he was concerned for her health, but at the same time, she almost wanted to believe that he had undressed her because he was attracted to her body. Suddenly, There was a flash of light and a horrendous crack of thunder. Hinata jumped into Naruto's arms with a loud scream. Are you afraid of lightning, Hinata? Naruto asked with a slight grin. Hinata blushed. No. It's just. There was another flash of light and a following thunder crack. Hinata tensed in Naruto's arms and buried her head into his shoulder. Naruto gazed down at the quivering girl in his arms and chuckled. You're cute. Wait. Did I say that out loud? Oh crap. Hinata smiled slightly and held herself closer to Naruto. The warmth emanating off him was intoxicating. Naruto's faint heartbeat was like a lullaby to Hinata. Her eyelids felt heavy. After all, it had been a very long day. There was another crack of thunder and Hinata became a quivering mess once again. Naruto tightened his grip on Hinata. Her body was so soft. The tighter Naruto squeezed, the tighter Hinata pressed her body against his. It was almost as if they were taking up the same space, their two hearts beating as one. Both were completely mesmerized by the other. Hinata pulled her head out of Naruto's shoulder and gazed up into his eyes. The only sound in the room was the soft pitter-patter of rain against the window. Time stood still for the young couple as they lost themselves in each other's eyes. Their faces seemed to unconsciously move closer together until their lips were not even an inch apart. There was a loud thunder crack and both Naruto and Hinata turned away with color in their cheeks. Hinata broke the awkward silence with a long yawn. Naruto, who made the mistake of watching Hinata yawn, started yawning too. It is getting pretty late. Should we be going to bed? Naruto mumbled through a yawn. Hinata giggled and wrapped her arms around Naruto's waist. Not yet. I don't think I will be able to go to sleep until the thunder stops. Naruto laughed and sat down in the middle of Hinata's giant bed. Hinata crawled over and sat right next to Naruto. Naruto spread his legs a bit so Hinata could crawl between them and sat with her back against his chest. Naruto then wrapped his arms around Hinata's neck and intertwined his legs with hers. Hinata was overwhelmed with warmth and a sense of security. She felt completely enveloped in Naruto's presence. The outside world fell from Hinata's mind and her only thoughts were on Naruto's deep blue eyes. It wasn't long before she was quietly snoring in Naruto's arms. Naruto gently placed her under the blankets and affectionately tucked her in. He then stepped over to his makeshift bed on the floor. He wrapped himself under his thin blankets and dozed off. All was quiet in the enormous house. The rain had begun to let up and the thunder had stopped. Suddenly, Hinata began to stir in her sleep. She sat straight up in bed and looked around the room. She turned over to the edge of her bed and smiled when she saw Naruto's sleeping face. Hinata got out of her giant, cozy bed and crept over to where Naruto was sleeping. She gently lifted up his blankets and crawled beneath them. She inched her body slowly towards Naruto. She placed her head upon his chest and listened to the faint pulsing of Naruto's heart. It was the most relaxing sound Hinata had ever heard. The smooth beat was more effective than any lullaby and Hinata soon fell asleep on top of Naruto. Hinata awoke to the streaming sunlight beaming down through her window. She kept her eyes closed as she nuzzled her cheek against the incredibly firm, but soft object beneath her. The object sighed beneath her and Hinata quickly sat up with a hot blush on her cheeks. She looked up at Naruto's peaceful face with a soft smile. He was the cutest thing she had ever seen. Naruto moaned softly and began to stir. When his eyes opened, Hinata was already back in her own bed and Naruto was left to wonder why his chest felt so warm. That was close, Hinata thought as she pulled the covers over her face and pretended to be asleep. She listened intently as Naruto got out of his bed. She steadied her breathing and relaxed her face, making sure it looked like she was still sleeping. However, her heart skipped a beat as her covers were suddenly pulled down to her neck. Naruto smiled to himself as he gazed upon Hinata's sleeping face. He was fascinated by how soft Hinata's skin looked. Her face just looked so inviting. Her lips were slightly parted and Naruto spent several minutes just listening to the faint sounds of air entering and leaving Hinata's mouth. His gaze then drifted to her lavender hair. Her hair almost seemed to shine and Naruto knew that if he lowered his face, his nose would be tickled by the soft scent of flowers. Naruto reached over and curled a stray strand of hair around Hinata's ear. Even through closed eyes, Hinata could feel Naruto's intense stare. She had to focus her entire mind on keeping her face and breathing calm. However, she couldn't stop a pink blush from creeping across her face. Hinata's heart leapt out of her chest when Naruto suddenly brushed her hair behind her ear. She wasn't sure how much longer she could pretend to be asleep. Just what was Naruto thinking? Thankfully there was a loud knock at the front door and Naruto left to go answer it. Hinata sat up and threw her face into her hands. She could still feel the heat from Naruto's hand on her cheek. Hinata placed a hand on her chest and felt her racing heart. Why was he being so intimate? Hinata, your father is here, Naruto said from the doorway of their room. Hiashi was standing right behind him. Hinata nearly jumped out of her skin and quickly pulled the covers over her slightly revealing nightgown. Hello, father. Hiashi eyed the makeshift bed on the floor and a vein pulsed out of his forehead. What is this? Hiashi said quietly, pointing to Naruto's bed. Naruto scratched the back of his head and smiled sheepishly. Well, I thought it was a little improper to be sleeping in the same bed. Preposterous. Hiashi interrupted with a cold, stern voice. Hinata and Naruto both shared an audible gulp. You two are engaged, and you must uphold the image of an engaged couple. And I do believe it is customary for a soon-to-be married couple to share a bed. Hiashi's voice grew louder with each syllable. What if someone else had seen this? It would throw your whole marriage into question. And that would bring the Hyuga clan's integrity into question. Is that what you want, Hinata? No, Hinata mumbled with downcast eyes. Then you two are to share a bed from this point forward. Do I make myself clear? Naruto felt a sense of defiance swell up within him, but as he gazed over at Hinata the feeling instantly evaporated. He could see the respect Hinata had for her father. It would probably hurt her even more to see him get in a fight with her father. Naruto sighed. Yes, sir. Hiashi raised an eyebrow as he turned his gaze to his future son-in-law. It appalled Hiashi to see that Naruto was still in his normal clothes. Naruto, since you are going to be sleeping next to my daughter from now on, I think it would be polite of you not to sleep in the same outfit you train in. I simply cannot even fathom the smell. Naruto's cheeks burned with embarrassment. He was so used to sleeping alone that he never even thought about how his clothes smelt. Hinata, however, secretly enjoyed Naruto's scent. It smelled like fresh dirt and ramen. But once in a while, the smell was a little overwhelming. However, I do have a legitimate reason for visiting you so early in the morning. Hiashi said, folding his arms into his sleeves. Today is the day we present your marriage to the entire Hyuga clan. Hinata's hand flew to her mouth as an audible gasp escaped from her lips while Naruto gulped meagerly. That's today. Hinata stammered. Yes, it has to be today. Several head clansmen have been asking about the purpose of this house and its new development. It's time we announce this marriage to the public. The entire Hyuga clan and other clan leaders need to believe that this marriage is legitimate. And in order for that to work, you two will have to convince everyone that you are deeply in love. Hinata and Naruto blushed and averted their eyes from each other. But what about our friends? Hiashi shook his head. This meeting is just with the Hyuga clan and some other clan officials. When and how you tell your friends is up to you. Hinata sighed with relief. Pretending to be in love with Naruto in front of her entire clan was bad enough, but at least she wouldn't have to do it in front of her teammates. The meeting will start very soon. You two need to be ready 10 minutes ago. Get moving. Naruto, you can shower here. Talk with Neji to get your proper clothing. Hinata will come with me to get ready at the main complex. Hinata quickly threw on a jacket and followed her father out the door into the Hyuga complex. Naruto meanwhile headed for the shower. As he took his clothes off, Hiyashi's earlier comment swirled around his head. He put his undershirt to his nose and sniffed. It's a good thing he was in the bathroom because Naruto felt like he was about to redecorate the walls. When was the last time he washed that thing? Naruto shrugged, threw the shirt into a hamper, and got into the shower. 30 minutes later, Naruto stepped out of the warm bathroom with a towel strapped around his waist. Since today was a very special day, he had made sure to wash extra hard in every nook and cranny. He would have to work extremely hard not to ruin today for Hinata and her family. After all, they would become his family very soon. Suddenly, there was a loud knock at the front door and Naruto went running to answer with his towel dangling dangerously around his waist. Yes, Naruto said, swinging the door open. Neji was standing outside with a black set of robes in his hand. Neji's face erupted in color as his eyes fell on Naruto's bare torso. Naruto, what are you doing answering the door while dressed like that? Here, put these on. Neji yelled, thrusting the outfit into Naruto's chest. Naruto smiled brightly and reached up to grab the robes. However, in doing so he removed the hand that was holding the towel up. The towel slowly untangled and began to slip down Naruto's waist. Meanwhile, Neji, being quite the observant one, noticed Naruto's drooping towel and with ninja reflexes, quickly reached inside, grabbed the doorknob, and slammed the door shut, sparing him from being witness to little Naruto. Once the door was safely shut, Neji sighed deeply. I truly do feel for you, Hinata. I simply will never understand how that boy can perform an intricate move like the Rasengan, but fail to grasp how to tie his towel around his waist. Several minutes later, Naruto emerged from the house wearing the black robes Neji had given him. Naruto thought he looked pretty dashing in them, but his smile quickly faded when he saw Neji's frown. This is a very serious matter, Naruto. You have to convince every person at the meeting that you and Hinata are in love. And just making googly eyes with her isn't going to cut it. At this meeting you will also have to act like a proper gentleman worthy of entering the Hyuga family. The best thing you could do is to just sit down, don't move, and let Hinata and Hiashi do all the talking. But I doubt you know how to sit like a noble. Naruto shrugged. It's just sitting down. How hard could it be? Neji laughed. This is coming from the kid who mastered the Rasengan in 3 days. Let's see how long it takes you to master sitting down. 10 minutes later, Neji and Naruto were in a large, empty room with several dozen round tables and chairs. Naruto was amazed. 100 people could easily fit into this room. And at the very front of the room, there were 2 pillows rested upon a large platform that sat several feet above the ground. It looked much like a stage and Naruto could guess just who was going to occupy the 2 pillow seats. Naruto gulped. He hadn't realized that he was going to be on display in front of hundreds of people. Neji walked Naruto up to the platform and gestured to the pillow on the right. Please, have a seat. Naruto sat firmly on his butt and crossed his legs. Wrong. Neji smirked. What? How is this wrong? Naruto asked incredulously. That is not how a noble is supposed to sit. Watch, I'll demonstrate. Neji walked over to the pillow beside Naruto and sat down with his knees bent so that the only part of him touching the ground was his shins and the tops of his feet. Now you try. Naruto sat up and bent his legs just like Neji's, but when he tried to sit back down on them they buckled and he fell on his side. How are you doing that? Naruto asked as he tried to sit on his calves again. Discipline. Neji said calmly. Ignore the pain in your legs. It will go away eventually. Naruto took a deep breath and sat down on top of his bent legs. Pain flooded through his shins and feet, but Naruto ignored them and focused his mind on sitting perfectly still. Hey, Neji, I think I'm getting it. Wrong. Neji shouted, causing Naruto to fall over again. Your back must be straight. Your hands must be unclenched and laid on your lap. And your face must be calm and emotionless. 20 minutes later, Naruto was sitting like a true noble. Good, Naruto. Now just hold that position for the next hour or so. Neji said as he got up and ran out of the room. This is impossible, Naruto thought, completely alone in the giant conference room. How am I going to sit here like this for a whole hour? Focus, Naruto. You have to do this for Hinata. Just don't move. Hello, Naruto, a timid voice called out behind Naruto. Naruto turned his head and found himself staring at a transformed Hinata. Her hair was done up in two tightly curled buns and there was traces of makeup on her face. She was dressed in a long, flowing pink kimono. There was a light pink blush on her cheeks, but her eyes almost seemed to sparkle as she gazed at her fiancé. She was absolutely stunning. Hinata, you look different, Naruto said. Naruto kicked himself mentally. Different. Smooth. Naruto. I'm such an idiot. However, Hinata giggled and her blush grew darker. Thank you, Naruto. You look pretty different. Why yourself? Naruto smiled broadly. This robe is probably worth more money than my entire apartment. Both Naruto and Hinata laughed. It was going to be a very awkward day and the laughing felt really good. Hiashi stepped out from behind Hinata and the laughing ceased. It is time to get into position. The clan leaders should be here very soon, Hiashi said in a strict tone. Hinata immediately walked over and sat next to Naruto. Amazing, Naruto thought as he watched Hinata flawlessly sit in the position he had just spent 20 minutes getting into. She really is quite flexible, and that kimono is so pretty, she looks so. Naruto shook his head. This really wasn't the time for those kinds of thoughts. Naruto closed his eyes and wiped all emotion from his face. A sweat drop flew from his brow as he focused his mind on one thing. Don't move. Don't move. Don't move. Don't move. Hiashi nodded to Neji. It was time to let the guests in. Hopefully, Naruto and Hinata could pull this off. Minutes later, the meeting room was filled with dozens of Hyuga clan officials and several other leaders from various clans. Each person had their eyes fixed upon the young couple in front of them. Most everyone was talking amongst themselves on why this couple was wearing sacred clothing. Hiashi, who was standing in front of Naruto and Hinata, held up a hand and the room grew quiet. Now I am sure many of you have questions on why we are here. Hiashi began in a booming voice. Unfortunately, based upon the intimate nature of this occasion, the amount of information I can give is limited. Simply put, we are here to acknowledge the marital binding of my daughter to this young man, Hiashi said as he placed a hand on Naruto's shoulder. There was a loud outburst in the crowd. One elderly Hyuga clan official, however, stood up from his chair. Hiashi, this is preposterous. Do you have any idea what that boy carries inside? That is enough, Hiashi shouted, cutting off the elderly man and the entire chattering crowd. Another man stood up, however, this one was slightly younger. He has a point, Hiashi. When Hinata comes of age she will eventually inherit control over the Hyuga clan. Her husband will also gain power over the clan. As such, it is customary for an heiress to choose a prestigious and powerful husband. This boy is an outsider. What right does he have to govern us? Hiashi nodded. I can see your point. However, none of this is relevant. I am not doing this for the clan. I am doing this for my daughter. I cannot force her into an arranged marriage when she is already in love with another man. Everyone looked to Hinata. There were several whispers around the room and Hinata's cheeks burned scarlet. She took a deep breath and stood up. It's true. I am completely in love with the boy beside me. I have chosen him to be my husband and he has chosen me to be his wife. I will do whatever is necessary to validate this marriage. Hiashi smiled. He was impressed by his daughter's boldness. She really seemed to convince a good portion of the crowd. Unbeknownst to Hiashi, Hinata had spoken the truth. Her words had come directly from the most intricate levels of her soul. Naruto, however, heard none of it. His eyes were closed, but his face remained calm. All of his energy was being focused into one thought. Don't move. Don't move. Don't move. Bees. Naruto flinched as a fly flew around his ear. His concentration slipped and Naruto felt a bead of sweat fall down his forehead. Naruto quickly regained his composure and tried to ignore the fly buzzing around his head. However, the fly had different plans. It flew right into Naruto's ear, tickling his inner ear and also deafening him with vociferous buzzing. Naruto's hand quickly flew up to his ear, but the fly flew away with ease. Even with Naruto's ninja reflexes, he could not catch the dastardly fly that seemed to be able to predict his every move. Naruto opened his eyes a crack, noticing that Hiashi was shouting something at the crowd of clansmen and Hinata had just stood up and was also shouting something. Naruto quickly spotted the fly. Its black body was easily visible when contrasted with the pink fabric it had just landed on. Naruto slowly raised his hand and prepared to stick. Stupid fly. You aren't getting away from me this time. Smack. The conference room was filled by an eerie quiet as everyone turned their gaze to Naruto. Triumph was boldly written across his face. His hand was outstretched and placed palm first on pink fabric. Naruto had just slapped Hinata's butt in front of the entire Hyuga clan. Naruto pulled back his hand and frowned as he realized the fly was nowhere to be seen. His gaze drifted back to the crowd and he suddenly realized everyone was staring at him. He looked at his outstretched hand and gasped. He looked Hinata's butt and then back at his hand. Uh-oh. There were several hoots and whistles from the younger clansmen, but the majority of the officials just stared in shock. Hinata's face exploded in color and it was all she could do just to stay conscious. Hiashi practically popped a blood vessel. Just what the hell was that idiot thinking? Hiashi took a deep breath. This really wasn't the time to get angry. At least it seemed to convince some of the crowd of their marriage. Hiashi smiled weakly. As you can see, these two are deeply in love and it would be dishonorable to refute their marriage. But I do believe my daughter has made her point. There is no reason for her and her husband to remain here. Neji, please take them back to their home. Neji tapped Naruto on the shoulder and together they half-dragged the catatonic Hinata all the way back to their house. Hiashi smiled to himself. Maybe those two are more suited for each other than I thought. Do I need to remind you, Hiashi, that an heiress's husband must come from a high-ranking family? A chubby, non-Hyuga official said. Perhaps my son would be a better choice than this. Quiet, Asuka Kenji. Hiashi interrupted. I can assure you Naruto comes from a very high-ranking family. Quite possibly the highest-ranking family in the village. But frankly, that is none of your business. I have already told you what my daughter thinks of your son. Asuka slammed his fist on the table, got up from his chair, and left the room. Damn him. How dare he make a fool of my son? He has no idea who he is messing with. A Kenji always gets what he wants. Meanwhile, Naruto and Hinata were back in their house. Naruto was waiting outside the door of their room while Hinata got dressed. That didn't go so bad. Don't you think, Hinata? Naruto asked as he stepped out of his robes and into his pants. Not so bad. Slapping my butt in front of 100 people is your idea of, not so bad. I would hate to see your definition of a bad day. Why yeah, I really think some of them believed us. Hinata stepped out of her kimono and onto the soft carpet. She was completely naked as she had decided not to wear anything under her kimono. Hinata half expected Naruto to forget that she was in here and to come stumbling upon her body, but none of that happened. Hinata was able to slip on her underwear and regular clothes without embarrassing herself. She went over to the door and opened it, allowing Naruto to come in with his black robes in hand. So, are these ours now? Naruto asked pointing to the robes and kimono. Hinata nodded. They are very special garments. This is the kimono my mother was wearing when she married my father. And those are the robes he proposed in. Naruto gulped. I had better make sure nothing happens to them then. Hinata giggled. Yup. My father would probably kill you for real if you ever damaged those robes. After the laughter died down there was an awkward moment of silence as Hinata hung up the clothes in their closet. She turned back to Naruto and smiled brightly. So, Naruto, we still have most of the day to ourselves. Is there anything you would like to do? Naruto's eye twinkled as an idea popped into his head. The idea sprang from something Jiraiya had said a few days ago. Let's go out. And not like to Ichiraku's, but a real restaurant. Someplace fancy. Just like a real date. AD date. With Naruto. Hinata's face slowly turned back. The world started spinning